At 6:15 a.m. on July 30th, 1943, Staff Sergeant Michael Arooth slid into the tail turret of B-17 Tondelayo at RAF Kimballton, gazing at a gray English dawn that would carry him 500 miles into Germany. He was 24 years old, with 12 combat missions under his belt and 3 confirmed enemy kills to his name. The Luftwaffe had stationed over 300 fighters along the route to Kassel. Arooth settled onto the bicycle seat that served as his workstation. This tail gunner position was just 4 feet wide and 5 feet long. 2 Browning .50 caliber machine guns pointed backward through a plexiglass window. At 25,000 feet, the outside temperature would plummet to minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. His electrically heated suit was the only thing standing between him and death by hypothermia. The 8th Air Force called this the loneliest job in the war. The tail gunner worked alone, separated from the rest of the crew by 40 feet of aluminum fuselage. No one to talk to, no one to help if things went south. Just one man, 2 guns, and whatever the Luftwaffe threw his way. The numbers told the grim truth. In the summer of 1943, the average B-17 crew survived only 11 missions before being shot down, killed, or captured. Tail gunners died faster than anyone except ball turret gunners. German fighter pilots preferred attacking from the rear. The tail position took the first bullets. By July, the 379th Bombardment Group had lost 9 aircraft in just 2 months of operations. 90 men gone forever. It all came down to geometry. German pilots knew approaching from behind gave them the longest possible firing window. A Messerschmitt Bf 109 closing at 350 miles per hour from the 6 o'clock position had nearly 10 seconds to aim and fire before passing the bomber. The tail gunner had those same 10 seconds to hit a target moving at a combined speed of nearly 600 miles per hour. Most tail gunners never even got the chance to fire back. The Focke-Wulf 190 carried 2 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns. A single burst could shred the plexiglass turret, kill the gunner, and knock out the tail controls. Bombers without tail protection became easy prey. The fighters would circle back, line up, and finish the job. Standard Army Air Force's gunnery training taught gunners to wait, save ammunition, and only fire at ranges under 300 yards. It sounded good in a classroom, but in combat, 300 yards meant the enemy was already shooting. By the time a tail gunner pulled the trigger, he might already be dead. Arooth had watched this nightmare unfold firsthand. On his 6th mission, a B-17 flying off Tondelayo's right wing took a direct hit to the tail. The gunner never fired a shot. The fighter came in fast, guns blazing, and the first rounds tore through the plexiglass before he could react. The bomber fell out of formation, trailing smoke. 8 parachutes popped open, but the tail gunner wasn't among them. Official doctrine demanded patience, but Arooth questioned every part of it. Fighters attacked from maximum range because they knew American gunners would hold their fire. Luftwaffe pilots had learned the patterns. They used the training manual like a roadmap. Want to see how Arooth challenged the doctrine getting gunners killed? Hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Arooth. That morning, 186 B-17's took off from bases across eastern England. 123 P-47 Thunderbolts would escort them part way, but fuel limits forced the fighters to turn back over Belgium. The bombers would fly the final 200 miles to Kassel alone. Arooth checked his ammo belts. 400 rounds per gun, 800 total. The manual said that was enough for a standard mission, but Arooth already knew the manual was wrong about everything else. By noon, he'd find out if he was right. The cost of being wrong? A closed casket funeral and a telegram sent to his family. The formation crossed the English Channel at 14,000 feet, still climbing. Arooth watched the water fade through his plexiglass window, the white cliffs of Dover shrinking to a pale line on the horizon. Ahead lay occupied France, then Belgium, then the heart of Nazi Germany. The P-47 escorts stayed close, their presence a temporary shield, but Arooth knew the math. The Thunderbolts had enough fuel for roughly 90 minutes of combat flight. The mission to Kassel would take 6 hours. For most of the journey, the bombers would fly unprotected. Arooth had followed doctrine on his first few missions. Wait for the fighter to close, aim carefully, fire short bursts, save ammo. Gunnery school instructors had drilled this into every student. Ammo was limited. Accuracy mattered more than volume. A disciplined gunner could make 800 rounds last a whole mission. But the doctrine assumed the enemy would play by the rules. The Luftwaffe didn't. German pilots had studied American tactics. They knew gunners waited until 300 yards, so they opened fire at 600 yards, pouring cannon shells into the formation while Americans held their triggers. By the time tail gunners started shooting, the damage was already done. Arooth saw the problem differently. A Focke-Wulf 190 at 600 yards wasn't a hard target. It was flying straight at him, nose on, showing its largest profile. The closure rate made its apparent size double every few seconds. A gunner who fired early could walk tracers onto the target, adjusting aim as the range closed. The risk? Running out of ammo. 800 rounds sounded like a lot, until you split them between 15, 20, even 30 separate attacks. At 50 rounds per burst, the math turned brutal. But Arooth accepted the trade-off. A gunner who saved ammo but died on the third attack had made a bad deal. Survival meant disrupting the enemy's attack before it succeeded. If that meant running low on bullets, he'd handle it later. Dead men didn't need reserve ammo. He tested this theory on his fourth mission, a June raid on submarine pens at St. Nazaire. 2 Bf-109s approached from 6 o'clock low, the classic tail attack. Doctrine said, wait. Arooth fired at 700 yards. Tracers arced across the sky, falling short at first, then climbing toward the lead fighter. The German pilot saw the fire, broke off the attack, and dived away before reaching effective cannon range. His wingman followed. Neither hit Tondelayo. The crew chief questioned Arooth after landing. Ammo counts showed he'd used nearly 200 rounds in one engagement. At that rate, he'd run dry before reaching deep German targets. Arooth explained his reasoning, but the chief remained skeptical. Other tail gunners heard about it. Some called him reckless. Wasting ammo on long-range shots violated everything the Army Air Forces taught. But Tondelayo kept coming home, mission after mission, crew intact. Other 527 Squadron aircraft weren't so lucky. By mid-July, 3 bombers were down, 30 men lost. Now, crossing into Belgium on July 30th, Arooth watched the P-47's waggle their wings and turn back to England. Their fuel gauges demanded retreat. The bombers pressed on alone. Somewhere ahead, 300 German fighters waited. Arooth would need every round he had and the chance to use them. The first fighters appeared at 11:42, climbing from the southeast in groups of 4. Arooth counted 8, then 12, then stopped. Tondelayo's tail was surrounded by black crosses on yellow noses. The lead fighter attacked from 6 o'clock high, diving toward the formation at 400 miles per hour. Arooth tracked it through his gun sight, watching its wingspan grow with each second. At 800 yards, he squeezed both triggers. The twin Brownings roared to life, sending tracers streaking across the sky. The first rounds fell short, vanishing below the diving fighter. Arooth adjusted, walking fire upward. At 600 yards, tracers found their mark. Bright flashes sparked along the Messerschmitts' engine cowling. The German pilot banked hard right, smoke trailing, never finishing his firing pass. The fighter spiraled down into the clouds. Arooth had no time to watch. The second attacker was already closing, lower this time, trying to slip beneath his field of fire. The angle was tough, forcing him to depress his guns to their mechanical limit. He fired anyway, a long burst toward the fighter. The Focke-Wulf pilot flinched, pulling up early and firing his cannons into empty sky above Tondelayo. The attacks continued for 47 minutes, wave after wave of German fighters slicing through the formation, targeting stragglers and damaged bombers. Arooth fired at everything in range, burning ammo 3 times faster than recommended. His gun barrels glowed red from sustained fire. At 12:29, a Bf-109 approached directly from behind, flying straight and level. Courageous or foolish, Arooth didn't care. He centered the fighter in his sights and held the triggers down. The Brownings hammered for 6 straight seconds, pouring over 100 rounds into the aircraft. The Messerschmitt disintegrated, engines torn from the fuselage, wings folding back. What was left tumbled past Tondelayo, close enough for Arooth to see the empty cockpit. The pilot had either ejected or died at the controls. 2 confirmed kills, ammo down to 180 rounds. The formation reached Kassel at 12:51 and began its bombing run. For 11 minutes, the bombers flew straight and level, unable to maneuver while bombardiers lined up targets. The Luftwaffe knew this was their most vulnerable moment. Fighters attacked with renewed fury. A Focke-Wulf 190 dived on Tondelayo from 5 o'clock. Arooth swung his guns to meet it, firing a short burst. Rounds hit the fighter's wing root, but the pilot kept coming, cannon shells tearing through Tondelayo's tail. Arooth felt the impacts before the pain. 20-millimeter fragments shredded the plexiglass, tore his flight suit, and buried themselves in his left arm and shoulder. His left gun jammed. Hydraulic fluid sprayed the compartment. He kept firing with his right gun, one-handed, bleeding. He tracked the wounded Focke-Wulf as it pulled away. A final burst hit its tail assembly. The aircraft snap-rolled and dived to the ground. His 3rd kill of the mission. The intercom crackled with crew voices, someone asking about damage, another reporting flak ahead. Arooth tried to respond, but his throat was dry. Blood pooled on the turret floor, freezing instantly in sub-zero air. 737 rounds expended, 63 left, 3 fighters destroyed, and the mission was only half over. Tondelayo still had 250 miles to fly back to England, through the same gauntlet that nearly killed him. Arooth wrapped a scarf around his wounded arm and waited for the next attack. The return flight began at 13:04. Tondelayo turned west with 185 other bombers, leaving Kassel burning under a column of black smoke. Arooth stayed at his post, scanning the sky through blood-smeared plexiglass. The Luftwaffe wasn't done. Fighters regrouped over Belgium, fresh aircraft replacing those lost that morning. The second gauntlet would be just as deadly. His left arm was numb from cold and wounds. The jammed gun was useless, the feed mechanism shattered by the same cannon shell that injured him. 1 working gun, 63 rounds, 250 miles of hostile airspace. The math demanded a new approach. 63 rounds meant maybe 3 20-round engagements. Every trigger pull had to count. Suppressive fire was a luxury he couldn't afford. At 13:31, 2 Bf-109s closed from 7 o'clock. Arooth waited until 500 yards, then fired a precise 12-round burst at the lead fighter. Tracers hit the engine cowling. The Messerschmitt rolled inverted and dived away, trailing glycol coolant. The wingmen broke off. 51 rounds left. Tondelayo crossed into France at 14:15. Fighter attacks faded as the Luftwaffe reached their range limit. By 14:47, the formation had outrun the last interceptors. The English Channel appeared 20 minutes later. Landing at Kimballton at 15:52, Arooth couldn't climb out of the turret unassisted. Ground crew pulled him through the narrow hatch and carried him to an ambulance. The flight surgeon counted 11 fragment wounds in his arm, shoulder, and upper back. Word spread through the 379th. Within hours, everyone knew the tail gunner on Tondelayo had scored 3 confirmed kills and 2 probables while wounded, using 1 gun and 63 rounds. The mission report noted his early engagement technique as key to the bomber's survival. Other tail gunners started asking questions. Doctrine said wait until 300 yards, but Arooth fired at 800. Doctrine said save ammo, but he used 700 rounds before getting hit. Doctrine got gunners killed. Arooth was alive. The 527's gunnery officer reviewed Tondelayo's gun camera footage, tracers reaching far beyond normal range, disrupting attacks before German pilots could aim. Early fire forced enemies to maneuver, ruining their accuracy and reducing hits. By mid-August, 3 other 527th tail gunners adopted Arooth's tactics. Their survival rates rose, and the bombers they protected came home less damaged. The pattern was impossible to ignore. On September 1st, the 379th Group commander received a preliminary report. Aggressive early fire cut bomber casualties by disrupting coordinated fighter attacks. It challenged 2 years of established doctrine. Meanwhile, Arooth recovered in the station hospital. Fragments had missed major blood vessels and nerves. The flight surgeon cleared him for duty on August 19th, 3 weeks after Kassel. Tondelayo was gone, written off due to irreparable battle damage. But a replacement waited. Same name, same crew. Arooth climbed back into the tail turret on August 26th. The Luftwaffe had noticed the shift in American tactics. By early September, their intelligence officers documented a pattern. American tail gunners firing earlier, sometimes beyond 600 yards. The change disrupted attack plans that had worked for months. German pilots reported the shift in debriefings. Approaching from 6 o'clock, once the safest angle against B-17's, was now deadly. Tracers forced them to maneuver even when rounds fell short, a devastating psychological blow. The Luftwaffe responded in 3 ways: faster approach speeds to reduce exposure, shifting to high 6 o'clock attacks to use gravity for pullouts, and targeting aggressive gunners. None solved the core problem. Faster approaches meant less accuracy, steeper angles made tracking harder, and identifying aggressive gunners mid-battle was impossible. Between August 26 and September 5th, the 379th flew 11 missions. Arooth participated in 4, adding 2 more confirmed kills. Other group tail gunners claimed 7 more. The Luftwaffe's loss ratio against the 379th climbed. German commanders tried concentrated attacks, focusing on single groups instead of spreading out. It worked on September 3rd, when 100th Bombardment Group lost 8 aircraft in 15 minutes. The 379th escaped by flying in a different combat box position, but the lesson was clear. The Luftwaffe was adapting. The air war over Europe had become a tactical chess match, each side studying the other, developing countermeasures. Arooth knew his edge came from surprise. Once the Germans adapted, it would vanish. Every mission was a test, every engagement data for both sides to analyze. The September 6th mission targeted Stuttgart, deep in southern Germany, 500 miles of enemy territory, the 8th Air Force's longest penetration that month. Intelligence predicted heavy fighter opposition. Stuttgart made ball bearings, critical to Germany's war machine, and was one of Europe's most defended targets. Flak batteries ringed the city, fighters lined every approach route. The September 5th briefing laid it out. The 379th would lead the combat wing, responsible for navigation and bomb aiming. Lead position meant taking the first fighter attacks, flying straight while others maneuvered, maximum exposure. That evening, Arooth checked his guns, both Brownings freshly serviced, new barrels installed after heavy use. He loaded 1,200 rounds instead of the standard 800. Extra weight didn't matter. Firepower did. Tomorrow would test everything he'd learned. The Stuttgart mission launched at 5:40 a.m. on September 6th. 187 bombers climbed into an overcast English sky, forming up over the North Sea before turning southeast. Tondelayo flew in the 379th's lead element. Arooth would face the first attacks from any direction. Fighters found them over France at 9:15, Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs rising from regional airfields to intercept before they reached Germany. Initial attacks came from 11 o'clock, head-on passes testing nose gunners, not the tail. Arooth waited, watching contrails multiply. The Luftwaffe was massing forces. By 9:40, intelligence counted over 100 interceptors tracking the formation. Rear attacks began at 10:08 to 12 Bf-109s positioned 2,000 feet below, then pulled up in a climbing 6 o'clock low attack. Arooth fired at 700 yards, tracers hitting the lead element. 2 fighters broke off instantly, a third took multiple hits and fell away smoking. The remaining 9 pressed on, cannon shells tearing through the 379th formation. The B-17 off Tondelayo's left wing took hits to its number 3 engine. Another bomber trailed fuel from ruptured tanks. Arooth kept firing, switching targets as fighters flashed by. His ammo counter dropped steadily, 600, 500, 400 rounds left. Attacks showed no sign of stopping. At 10:31, a Focke-Wulf 190 dived on Tondelayo from directly above and behind, using the sun to hide. Arooth spotted it too late. 20mm shells tore through the tail before he could aim his guns. The impact threw him against the plexiglass. His left gun was destroyed, receiver shattered by a direct hit. Fragments cut his arms and scalp, blood poured down his face, partially blinding him. He kept firing with his right gun. The Focke-Wulf pulled up and rolled away, smoking from hits. Arooth wiped blood from his eyes. Tondelayo was dying. Cannon fire had severed hydraulic lines, damaged tail controls, and punctured wing fuel tanks. Pilots fought to keep altitude, but the bomber lost the battle against gravity. The formation reached Stuttgart at 11:04. Tondelayo held position just long enough to drop its bombs, then fell out of formation as damage overwhelmed the crew. 2 engines ran rough, fuel was critical. Over eastern France, pilots made the call. Tondelayo couldn't reach England. Their best chance was a controlled ditching in the English Channel, where air-sea rescue might find them before hypothermia set in. Arooth stayed at his post as the bomber descended, watching for pursuing fighters. None came. The Luftwaffe focused on healthier bombers. Tondelayo hit the channel at 15:12, slamming into gray water at 120 miles per hour. The fuselage broke apart on impact. Arooth was thrown forward, head hitting the gun mount. Darkness. When he woke, he floated in a life raft. British rescue boats approaching. All 10 crew members survived the ditching. Tondelayo, their home for 17 missions, lay on the channel floor. The 379th Commander immediately requested Arooth's mission reports. On October 14, 1943, he received the Distinguished Service Cross, the Army's second highest decoration, recognizing his actions at Kassel and Stuttgart, specifically his wounded, one-handed firing that protected Tondelayo. By late October, 8th Air Force gunnery staff finished their analysis. Data from 14 bomber groups over 3 months challenged 1942-era assumptions. Tail gunners engaging beyond 500 yards had far higher survival rates. Early fire disrupted enemy formations, forcing defensive maneuvers instead of stable aiming. Ammo costs were high, but the trade-off was worth it. Brigadier General Frederick Anderson, 8th Bomber Command's operational planner, reviewed the findings personally. If coordinated early fire from multiple bombers could stop mass attacks, the entire defensive doctrine needed revision. In November, policy changed. New guidelines let tail gunners fire at extended ranges when tactics allowed. Bureaucratic language was cautious, but the message was clear. Arooth's method was now official. Arooth never saw the policy fully take effect. Head injuries from the Stuttgart ditching were worse than initially thought. After returning to duty in late September, he completed 3 more missions before being permanently grounded. Recurring headaches and vision issues made combat impossible. His final record, 17 confirmed kills, 4 probables pending verification, ranking him among the 8th Air Force's top bomber gunners. Some records cited 19 victories, but inconsistent documentation made exact counts hard. He later received the Distinguished Flying Cross, 2 air medals with oak leaf clusters, and a Purple Heart, more decorations than most pilots. The 379th flew for 18 more months, through winter 1943, D-Day summer 1944, and 1945's final campaigns. Arooth's tactics spread across the 8th Air Force. Tail gunners adopted early engagement, and bomber loss rates fell in 1944, aided by longer-range escorts in better aircraft too. Captured Luftwaffe pilots noted the danger. Tail attacks grew harder, and some switched to head-on passes to avoid rear fire. Arooth returned to the U.S. in early 1944, assigned to train new gunners, passing on his life-saving tactics to those deploying overseas. His post-war choice surprised everyone. Arooth didn't leave the military. He transferred to the newly formed U.S. Air Force in 1947 and served 15 more years, retiring as a Master Sergeant in 1962. Many veterans with his experiences sought civilian life, but Arooth saw it differently. The Air Force gave him purpose during the war's darkest days. His skills saved lives. His crew, the gunners he trained. Walking away felt like abandoning something vital. Post-war life was quiet. He married, raised a family, and rarely spoke of combat. Medals stayed in a drawer, memories locked away. Arooth stayed at his post as the bomber descended, watching for pursuing fighters. None came. The Luftwaffe focused on healthier bombers. Tondelayo hit the channel at 1512, slamming into gray water at 120 miles per hour. The fuselage broke apart on impact. Arooth was thrown forward, head hitting the gun mount. Darkness. When he woke, he floated in a life raft, British rescue boats approaching. All 10 crew members survived the ditching. Tondelayo, their home for 17 missions, lay on the channel floor. The 379th Commander immediately requested Arooth's mission reports. On October 14, 1943, he received the Distinguished Service Cross, the Army's second highest decoration, recognizing his actions at Kassel and Stuttgart, specifically his wounded, one-handed firing that protected Tondelayo. By late October, 8th Air Force gunnery staff finished their analysis. Data from 14 bomber groups over 3 months challenged 1942-era assumptions. Tail gunners engaging beyond 500 yards had far higher survival rates. Early fire disrupted enemy formations, forcing defensive maneuvers instead of stable aiming. Ammo costs were high, but the trade-off was worth it. Brigadier General Frederick Anderson, 8th Bomber Command's operational planner, reviewed the findings personally. If coordinated early fire from multiple bombers could stop mass attacks, the entire defensive doctrine needed revision. In November, policy changed. New guidelines let tail gunners fire at extended ranges when tactics allowed. Bureaucratic language was cautious, but the message was clear. Arooth's method was now official. Arooth never saw the policy fully take effect. Head injuries from the Stuttgart ditching were worse than initially thought. After returning to duty in late September, he completed 3 more missions before being permanently grounded. Recurring headaches and vision issues made combat impossible. His final record, 17 confirmed kills, 4 probables pending verification, ranking him among the 8th Air Force's top bomber gunners. Some records cited 19 victories, but inconsistent documentation made exact counts hard. He later received the Distinguished Flying Cross, 2 air medals with oak leaf clusters, and a Purple Heart, more decorations than most pilots. The 379th flew for 18 more months, through winter 1943, D-Day summer 1944, and 1945's final campaigns. Arooth's tactics spread across the 8th Air Force. Tail gunners adopted early engagement, and bomber loss rates fell in 1944, aided by longer-range escorts in better aircraft too. Captured Luftwaffe pilots noted the danger. Tail attacks grew harder, and some switched to head-on passes to avoid rear fire. Arooth returned to the U.S. in early 1944, assigned to train new gunners, passing on his life-saving tactics to those deploying overseas. His post-war choice surprised everyone. Arooth didn't leave the military. He transferred to the newly formed U.S. Air Force in 1947 and served 15 more years, retiring as a master sergeant in 1962. Many veterans with his experiences sought civilian life, but Arooth saw it differently. The Air Force gave him purpose during the war's darkest days. His skills saved lives. His crew, the gunners he trained. Walking away felt like abandoning something vital. Post-war life was quiet. He married, raised a family, and rarely spoke of combat. Medals stayed in a drawer, memories locked away.